Let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply, only to watch them shatter that trust right in front of you? Have you ever stayed awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe you weren't enough? If you know that feeling, then listen closely. Because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about what happens when a woman who was broken learns to rise stronger than anyone ever expected. And hey, don't just sit back. Stay with me. Because what you're about to hear might touch a part of your heart you thought you'd buried. And maybe, just maybe, it'll remind you of something powerful. That no matter who tried to break you, you still hold the power to rise. The night glittered with lies, perfume, and betrayal. In the heart of Manhattan, the penthouse lights burned like a beacon above the city. Inside, laughter and music pulsed from a private after-party where Ambrose Colton, a man once praised as a self-made billionaire, raised his glass to toast his mistress. He thought no one was watching. He thought his pregnant wife would remain quietly at home, waiting for him like she always did. But the universe has a way of pulling the curtain back at the most brutal moment. Jacqueline Colton sat on the edge of their velvet couch, hands trembling around a stack of legal documents. Her belly rose gently beneath her silk dress, a reminder of the life she carried, the child who should have been their greatest joy. Instead, she felt abandoned, a stranger in her own marriage. Every tick of the antique clock echoed like a drumbeat of truth. Her husband was not coming home as the man she once believed he was. Tonight, he belonged to another woman. The betrayal had not been whispered, it had been shouted by circumstance. Earlier that evening, Ambrose had lied to her face with that polished smile he used to charm investors. "Just business, Jackie," he had said, straightening his cufflinks, smelling of cologne that wasn't hers. He kissed her cheek without meeting her eyes, then disappeared into the city. Hours later, photos surfaced online, paparazzi flashes catching him with a raven-haired woman clinging to his arm, both stepping out of a limousine outside the Carlisle Hotel. The woman laughed boldly, draped in a red silk gown that left little to imagination. Reporters labeled her as his business associate. But Jacqueline knew better. The image burned in her mind. Her husband had chosen that life over her swollen feet, over the kicks of their unborn child, over the vows they had spoken in front of God and hundreds of guests. She wanted to scream, to smash the framed wedding photos that lined their marble hallway. But she sat still, heart thudding, a quiet storm gathering in her chest. When the key finally turned in the lock hours before dawn, Ambrose stumbled in with the smug exhaustion of a man who had lived a double life too long. His tuxedo hung open, his tie loosened, his eyes glassy with champagne. He froze when he saw Jacqueline waiting, her eyes like sharpened steel. "Where have you been?" she asked, her voice steady, though her body shook. He chuckled. "Careless. You're awake. Don't start with the nagging, Jackie. I had meetings, investors. You wouldn't understand." She held up the photographs she had printed from the internet, his face drained of color. "This," she whispered, her voice breaking, "is this what you call business?" Ambrose's jaw tightened. For a moment, guilt flickered across his features, then arrogance smothered it. "So what if it is? Do you think you're enough? You're just a pregnant woman slowing me down. I need more than a wife who stays home in pajamas." The words sliced through her like glass. Her hand instinctively rested on her belly, protecting the child within her from his cruelty. For the first time, she saw him not as her husband, not as the father of her child, but as a man stripped of all decency. Without a word, Jacqueline slid the stack of papers across the glass table, divorce papers, her signature already inked at the bottom. Ambrose laughed, loud and mocking. "You divorce me? Don't be ridiculous. You can't survive without me. No one would want a woman carrying another man's child. You'll come crawling back. You'll beg." But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that while she felt broken in this moment, life had already set the stage for her salvation. Somewhere across the city, another man, a billionaire far more powerful than Ambrose, was about to change her fate forever. The penthouse walls trembled with silence after his cruel laughter. Jacqueline swallowed her tears. The night air outside the panoramic windows glittered with possibility, even as her heart fractured. She gathered her courage, whispering to herself, "You'll see. You'll all see." And when the morning sun rose, it would carry with it the beginning of a reckoning that would shake Ambrose to his core. Because Jacqueline was not going to be left broken. She was going to rise. And the man who shattered her would soon discover that nothing is more dangerous than a betrayed woman with dignity, determination, and an unexpected ally in the form of a billionaire who saw her true worth. But when Ambrose discovered exactly who that ally was, his entire empire would begin to crumble. Jacqueline Mitchell Colton had never been born into luxury. Her roots were small town, where weekends meant family cookouts and afternoons watching Little League games from rusted bleachers. Her father was a mechanic who could fix anything with his hands, but rarely had enough cash left over to fix the family car. Her mother worked double shifts at the diner, pouring coffee with a smile even when her feet ached. From those humble beginnings, Jacqueline learned grit. She learned how to stretch every dollar, how to fight for every dream, and how to never give up, no matter how steep the climb. She carried that fire with her when she earned a scholarship to Columbia University in New York. It was her escape, her shot at building something beyond her parents' sacrifices. She studied literature, worked part-time in the campus library, and lived on instant noodles while other students breezed through life on their parents' credit cards. Even then, she had a quiet elegance. The kind of beauty that didn't scream for attention but lingered in people's minds. Her long chestnut hair, soft brown eyes, and calm demeanor drew people in. Professors admired her work ethic. Classmates trusted her wisdom. She was the girl everyone underestimated until she proved them wrong. It was during her junior year at a charity gala where she was volunteering that she first met Ambrose Colton. Back then, he wasn't the polished billionaire plastered across business magazines. He was ambitious, sharp-eyed, and hungry for success. He had just landed his first big real estate deal, and people whispered his name with cautious respect. Jacqueline hadn't known who he was. She only noticed the way he carried himself, the way he laughed a little too loud, the way his gaze lingered on her when she passed by with a tray of champagne flutes. "Are you working this event?" he had asked, his voice smooth with curiosity. "Yes," she answered simply, balancing the tray on her arm. "Scholarship committee." Something about her answer intrigued him. Maybe it was that she wasn't there to impress, but to serve. Maybe it was that she looked at him without awe, as if he were just another man instead of a rising star. Whatever it was, Ambrose pursued her with determination. Flowers delivered to her dorm, surprise visits to the library, lavish dates that swept her out of the world she knew and into his universe of glittering lights and endless possibilities. At first, Jacqueline resisted. She wasn't sure if she belonged in his world or if he truly belonged in hers. But Ambrose had a way of making promises sound like destiny. "I'll give you the life you deserve," he whispered one night as they walked along the Hudson, the city lights shimmering across the water. "You'll never have to struggle again." For a girl who had grown up clipping coupons and worrying about rent, the promise was intoxicating. She believed him. She believed in him. They married in a lavish ceremony at the Plaza Hotel. The photos splashed across society pages showed her in a lace gown, radiant, holding his hand as if nothing could ever break them apart. To the world, she was lucky, married to one of the city's most promising young billionaires. To Jacqueline, it was more than luck. It was love. Or so she thought. For a while, life was beautiful. Their penthouse apartment had sweeping views of Manhattan. They traveled to Paris, dined in Michelin-star restaurants, rubbed shoulders with CEOs and celebrities. Ambrose made her feel chosen, special, as if she had stepped into a fairy tale. But fairy tales rarely last. Slowly, the cracks began to show. He grew restless, spending more nights at the office or with investors. She began to notice the faint smell of perfume that wasn't hers clinging to his suits, the lipstick smudges that didn't match her shade, the late-night text messages he guarded like state secrets. Still, Jacqueline endured. She told herself it was just the stress of his business, that every marriage had storms. And when she found out she was pregnant, she believed it would change everything. She imagined Ambrose holding their child, imagined the three of them as a family, bound together in ways betrayal could never undo. But reality was harsher. Ambrose's attention drifted further, not closer. He sneered at her cravings, rolled his eyes when she complained of fatigue, and spent money freely on parties while scolding her for buying prenatal vitamins. The man she once adored seemed to vanish before her eyes, replaced by someone cruel, careless, and distant. Jacqueline tried to remind herself of the girl she once was, the girl who had fought her way out of a small town, who had earned her place in New York on her own merit. But pregnancy made her vulnerable. Hormones, exhaustion, and the crushing loneliness of their cold penthouse made her doubt her own worth. She wondered if maybe she was too plain, too ordinary for a man like Ambrose. And then came that night. The night of his mistress. The night her illusions shattered completely. Still, beneath the heartbreak, a flicker of strength remained. She was her parents' daughter, after all. She knew what it meant to fight. She knew she couldn't let her child be raised in a home poisoned by deceit, and somewhere deep inside, she knew she was not as alone as she felt. For fate had already placed someone powerful, someone unexpected, on her path. A man whose shadow loomed larger than Ambrose's ego ever could. A man who would soon step into her life and change everything. She just didn't know yet that her salvation was already watching. The Colton penthouse towered above Manhattan like a glass cathedral to excess. Perched on the 50th floor, it offered a sweeping view of the city that never slept. From its floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline glittered in shades of gold and silver, 1,000 dreams suspended in steel. To the world outside, it was a symbol of success. Inside, it was a gilded cage. Jacqueline remembered the first time she stepped into the penthouse. She had been stunned by the polished marble floors, the imported Italian chandeliers, and the massive oil paintings that lined the walls. Every corner seemed designed to remind visitors that Ambrose Colton had arrived, that he was no longer the hungry young entrepreneur clawing his way up the ladder, but a man who now owned a piece of the city. For Jacqueline, though, the penthouse had always felt more like a museum than a home. It was too immaculate, too perfect, too cold. The kitchen was filled with the latest appliances, gleaming in stainless steel, but Jacqueline rarely cooked anymore. Ambrose preferred catering, lavish trays delivered by professionals, then discarded without a word of thanks. Their bedroom, with its oversized bed and silk sheets, was as vast as an empty ballroom. The walk-in closet displayed rows of designer gowns Ambrose insisted she wear to his galas, yet most nights she curled up in simple cotton dresses that reminded her of comfort, of home. But if the penthouse was cold, the gala halls of Manhattan's elite were even colder. Ambrose thrived there. Crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, velvet carpets, these were his playgrounds. Jacqueline often stood at his side during these events, her hand resting on her swollen belly, trying to smile as the city's most powerful men and women whispered about the next big deal. She had mastered the art of polite nods and soft laughs, all while feeling like an outsider in her own life. One gala in particular remained burned into her memory. The Metropolitan Museum Charity Ball, an event so exclusive that even celebrities had to beg for invitations. That night, the grand hall shimmered with diamonds and ambition. The air smelled of roses flown in from Paris, and champagne poured into crystal flutes worth more than her parents' yearly income back in their hometown. Jacqueline wore a sapphire gown chosen by Ambrose's stylist. Her feet ached from heels, her back strained under the weight of pregnancy, but she stood tall, determined to support her husband. Ambrose, on the other hand, was in his element. He laughed with investors, clinked glasses with politicians, and introduced Jacqueline as if she were a decorative accessory rather than the woman carrying his child. She caught glimpses of herself in the mirrored walls. A tired smile, a hand resting protectively on her belly. She looked out of place among the glittering women draped in sequins and confidence. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if Ambrose felt the same way, that she didn't belong. Later that night, as the orchestra played softly and guests mingled, Jacqueline excused herself to find a seat. That's when she noticed him. Not Ambrose, someone else. A man standing near the balcony, tall, broad-shouldered, with an aura that silenced the room around him. His suit was simple compared to the peacocks preening nearby, yet it fit him with an elegance that spoke of quiet power. People glanced at him, whispered, then looked away with the respect that only true influence commanded. She didn't know it then, but this was the man who would soon rewrite her future. Back at the penthouse, nights grew lonelier. The city outside pulsed with energy, but Jacqueline felt trapped. The walls echoed with silence when Ambrose was gone. Sometimes she would press her hand against the glass, watching taxis crawl below, wondering if somewhere out there was a version of her life where she wasn't invisible. Her pregnancy only deepened the isolation. Friends who once called stopped visiting, too intimidated by Ambrose or too busy with their own lives. Her parents phoned often, but she lied to them, insisting she was happy, that Ambrose was devoted, that the baby would be born into love. She couldn't bear to admit the truth, that behind the glittering facade, her marriage was rotting. And yet Ambrose paraded her at events as if she were proof of his success. "My wife," he would say with a smirk, draping an arm around her shoulders. "She's giving me an heir." The words felt like shackles. He didn't see her as a partner, a woman, or even a mother. She was a trophy, a vessel. The main setting of her life, this world of opulence, chandeliers, and penthouses, was supposed to be a dream. But every glittering surface only reflected her loneliness back at her. Until one night, when a single betrayal would turn this entire world upside down. The gala was winding down, champagne glasses half empty, laughter fading into whispers. Ambrose disappeared again, claiming he was finalizing business with a foreign investor. Jacqueline waited, her heart heavy, until she spotted him in the shadows of the courtyard. His arm was around another woman, a kiss, a laugh, a betrayal displayed as carelessly as tossing away a napkin. Her chest tightened, but she did not cry. Not yet. The penthouse lights, the gala glitter, the mirrored walls, all of it crumbled in her mind. Her world of luxury was nothing more than smoke and mirrors, and she finally saw it for what it was. And as she turned away, fighting the nausea rising in her throat, she did not see the man from the balcony step forward, his eyes following her with quiet intensity. The man who would soon break her chains had already noticed her pain. Ambrose Colton had always been a man of appetite. From the day Jacqueline first met him, ambition oozed from his every word, every gesture, every calculated smile. He wasn't just chasing success, he was devouring it, hungry for more no matter what or who stood in his way. That hunger had built him an empire, but it was also the very poison that began to rot him from the inside. By the time Jacqueline was 6 months pregnant, the man she had married was almost unrecognizable. He still looked like the polished billionaire plastered on magazine covers. Dark hair neatly styled, strong jaw, custom-tailored suits, but behind the sheen was arrogance so thick it suffocated anyone near him. His laugh no longer charmed, it sneered. His touch no longer comforted, it branded. Ambrose believed the world revolved around him. When he entered a room, conversations shifted. When he raised a glass, people listened. To him, Jacqueline was no longer a partner but a prop, a glowing wife carrying his heir, something to show off at galas before disappearing back into the shadows of his double life. That double life had a name, Cassandra Hart. Cassandra was everything Ambrose thought he deserved and everything Jacqueline was not, or at least that's how he saw it. She was younger by nearly a decade, a former fashion model who reinvented herself as a social media influencer. Her beauty was sharp, intentional, the kind that sliced through rooms and left men stumbling in her wake. Red lips, cascading dark curls, gowns cut to reveal more than they concealed. Cassandra knew how to use every inch of herself as a weapon. Ambrose met her at a luxury brand launch, where she was hired to add sparkle to the event. She didn't just sparkle, she burned. He was drawn instantly, intoxicated by her shameless laughter, the way she leaned into him as though he were the only man in the world worth noticing. Jacqueline, pregnant and tired, had been at home that night, arranging baby clothes in a nursery Ambrose never stepped foot in. From that moment, Cassandra became more than a mistress. She became an obsession. Ambrose started spending nights at business meetings that stretched past midnight, weekends away under the guise of corporate retreats. In reality, he was living a second life, indulging Cassandra with designer gifts, luxury trips, and promises whispered in hotel suites. But what made Cassandra dangerous wasn't just her beauty, it was her ambition. She wasn't content to be a hidden secret. She wanted status, headlines, and the kind of power that came with being attached to a billionaire like Ambrose. She flaunted their affair in subtle ways. An Instagram post from a Paris balcony Jacqueline had once stood on, a necklace that Jacqueline recognized as one Ambrose had purchased last Christmas. A shadow of Ambrose's reflection caught in the corner of a photo she claimed was just a friend. And Ambrose didn't stop her. He relished it. He wanted the world to see him not as a loyal husband, but as a man untouchable, powerful enough to flaunt his betrayal without consequence. The cruelty wasn't in whispers, it was in actions. One evening, at a gala Jacqueline reluctantly attended, she watched Ambrose cross the room with Cassandra on his arm. Not hidden, not discreet, bold, as though daring the world to judge him. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Whispers hissed from corner to corner, but Ambrose only tightened his grip on Cassandra's waist and smiled like a conqueror. Jacqueline's chest burned. She clutched her clutch tighter, her eyes darting to the ground as humiliation washed over her. Every camera flash felt like a dagger, every sideways glance like salt in an open wound. And still, Ambrose basked in it. He had become the villain of his own story, too blind to see it. He mistook arrogance for strength, cruelty for power. He thought Jacqueline would always remain silent, too weak to fight back. But villains never realize they are creating their own downfall. Cassandra whispered in his ear that night, her laugh echoing like glass shattering. Jacqueline could almost hear the words, see the smug glint in Cassandra's eyes as she looked in her direction. It wasn't enough for Cassandra to have Ambrose in private. She wanted Jacqueline to feel the sting of public defeat. Ambrose leaned in, his lips brushing Cassandra's ear, ignoring his wife across the room. Cameras snapped, champagne flowed, and Jacqueline felt her entire world cave in. But deep inside her, something shifted. Betrayal no longer felt like an ending, it felt like a beginning. A storm rising quietly, gathering force. Ambrose and Cassandra thought they had won. They thought Jacqueline would retreat, broken, humiliated, too fragile to fight. They had no idea that someone far more powerful had already noticed her pain and was ready to help her rise. The night of the Bright Futures Gala was meant to be another feather in Ambrose Colton's cap. For weeks he bragged about it, the investors attending, the politicians making speeches, the photographers covering every glittering angle. He insisted Jacqueline accompany him, though she was exhausted, her pregnancy making every step a struggle. "You'll smile for the cameras, Jackie," he told her with a dismissive wave. "That's all you're good for tonight." She wanted to refuse. She wanted to stay home in her robe, curled on the couch with a cup of tea, away from the claws of society. But she also wanted to protect what was left of her marriage, to try one last time for the sake of her unborn child. So she agreed. The gala was held at the Crystal Renaissance Hotel, a ballroom drenched in golden light. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. Polished marble floors reflected every sequin and diamond. Waiters in white gloves glided between tables carrying champagne. The city's elite sparkled under the glow of cameras, their laughter filling the air with the sound of privilege. Jacqueline arrived in a pale silver gown, one she had chosen herself instead of letting Ambrose's stylist dictate. It was modest, elegant, and draped gently over her pregnant form. She had hoped Ambrose would notice, that perhaps he'd see the effort she made. Instead, when he came to fetch her from their limo, he only glanced at her and muttered, "Try not to embarrass me tonight." Inside, Ambrose slipped into his element immediately. He was magnetic, greeting investors with firm handshakes, slapping backs, telling jokes that made entire tables roar. Jacqueline trailed behind him, her hand brushing her stomach, her smile weak but practiced. She nodded at acquaintances, endured the polite questions, ignored the pitying stares. She had been to enough of these events to know when whispers were about her. And then she saw her. Cassandra, the mistress, dressed in a gown of fire-red silk, cut so low the room itself seemed to blush. Her laughter rang out across the hall as she clung to Ambrose's arm the moment Jacqueline excused herself to sit down. At first, Jacqueline thought her eyes were deceiving her. Surely Ambrose wouldn't dare. Surely not tonight, not here. But then the cameras turned. Flashes erupted. Cassandra leaned into Ambrose, her lips brushing his ear as though whispering secrets. His hand rested openly on her waist, his smile wide, unashamed. The room hushed. Conversations faltered. Guests exchanged looks, some scandalized, others entertained. The betrayal was no longer whispered. It was on full display beneath the chandeliers. Jacqueline froze. The champagne flute in her hand trembled, drops spilling onto her gown. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet rooted to the marble floor. Her ears rang with laughter, Cassandra's shrill, Ambrose's booming, and then with whispers. "Isn't that his wife over there? She's pregnant, poor thing." Shameless, absolutely shameless. Heat rose in Jacqueline's cheeks. Her chest tightened until she thought she couldn't breathe. She turned, desperate to escape, but it was too late. Cassandra saw her. With a deliberate smirk, Cassandra tugged Ambrose closer, tilting her head toward Jacqueline as if pointing out prey. Ambrose followed her gaze. His eyes locked on Jacqueline, and instead of shame, there was mockery. He shrugged, as though to say, "What did you expect?" Then he bent and kissed Cassandra's cheek for the cameras. The flashes exploded like lightning. The humiliation was immortalized. Jacqueline's vision blurred. Her hand clutched her belly, not just for balance, but for protection. She felt the baby kick inside her as if sensing her pain. She whispered silently, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The room spun. She stumbled toward the exit, but not before she heard Cassandra's final dagger. "She looks like a tired nanny," Cassandra said loudly enough for half the room to hear. Laughter followed like thunder. The humiliation was complete. Outside, the night air was cold, sharp against her flushed skin. She pressed her back against the stone wall of the hotel, fighting tears. Her world had shattered in front of hundreds, and tomorrow it would be in the gossip columns with her humiliation smeared across headlines. But as she gasped for breath, clutching her stomach, something unexpected happened. A deep voice cut through the noise of her panic. "You don't deserve this." She looked up. The man from the balcony, the one whose presence had silenced rooms before, stood before her. His eyes, gray and piercing, softened when they met hers. His tall frame blocked the wind, his expression unreadable yet steady, like a fortress. Jacqueline's lips parted, but no words came. He extended a handkerchief, crisp white against the night. She hesitated, then took it, her fingers trembling. "I've been watching long enough," he said quietly, almost to himself. "It ends tonight." Jacqueline didn't know it yet, but this man was about to change everything, and Ambrose Colton had just made an enemy far more dangerous than he ever imagined. The night of the gala ended in silence. Not the gentle kind that soothes, but the kind that weighs heavy, pressing down until it suffocates. Jacqueline sat in the back of a black car Ambrose had ordered for her. Not out of kindness, but out of convenience. He hadn't even bothered to ride home with her. Instead, he stayed behind, clinking glasses with Cassandra, basking in the scandal he had created. The car wound its way through the glowing streets of Manhattan. Neon lights blurred past the windows, but Jacqueline didn't see them. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Red eyes, smudged makeup, a trembling lower lip. For the first time in her life, she didn't recognize herself. When she finally arrived at the penthouse, the doorman greeted her with pity in his eyes. She tried to ignore it, clutching her belly as she climbed into the elevator. The doors closed, trapping her in mirrored walls. She saw herself multiplied, broken, humiliated, small. Inside the penthouse, silence greeted her again. She lowered herself onto the couch, silk gown wrinkling beneath her, and let the tears come. She cried until her chest hurt, until her breath came in ragged gasps. She pressed her palms to her face, ashamed of her own weakness, terrified of the future. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Dozens of notifications lit the screen, headlines already spinning from the gala. Billionaire Ambrose Colton spotted with stunning companion. Wife left alone in the shadows. Paparazzi photos showed her pale and shaken in the background, while Ambrose and Cassandra smiled for the cameras. The humiliation was no longer confined to the ballroom. It was spreading across the internet, across the city, across the world. Her hand shook as she turned the phone face down. She couldn't bear to see more. She thought about calling her parents, but what could she say? That their daughter, who once dreamed of building a family full of love, had become the punchline of Manhattan's cruelest joke? She thought about calling her best friend from college, but distance had grown between them. What could words do now? The baby kicked again, a sharp reminder that she wasn't truly alone. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered, "I promise I'll protect you. I don't know how yet, but I will." Hours passed. The clock ticked past midnight, then 2, then 4. Jacqueline dozed in and out of restless sleep on the couch. When the door finally clicked open, she jolted awake. Ambrose stumbled in, his tuxedo wrinkled, his tie gone, the scent of perfume clinging to his skin. He smirked when he saw her, as though amused she was still awake. "You embarrassed yourself tonight," he slurred. Jacqueline's jaw dropped. "I embarrassed myself? You flaunted her in front of everyone. You humiliated me." Ambrose rolled his eyes, heading toward the bar to pour himself a drink. "Don't be dramatic. Everyone knew already. At least now it's out in the open. Besides..." He turned, glass in hand, his smirk cruel. "You should be grateful. People only talk about me because of her. You wouldn't understand." Her voice shook with rage. "I'm carrying your child, Ambrose. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, fear, she couldn't tell. Then it vanished. He shrugged, taking a sip. "Children don't matter until they can carry my name in boardrooms. Until then, they're just noise." The words sliced through her. She clutched her belly protectively, her tears returning. He had not only betrayed her, he had dismissed their unborn child as nothing more than an inconvenience. That night, Jacqueline broke. She curled on the couch, sobbing until her body trembled, until exhaustion forced her into a restless sleep. For the next several days, she moved like a ghost through the penthouse. She avoided the news, avoided the mirror, avoided Ambrose whenever possible. Meals went untouched. Her gowns hung limply in the closet, untouched symbols of a life she no longer wanted. She thought about divorce. The papers were already drawn up, sitting in her drawer. But the thought of raising a child alone terrified her. How could she provide? Where would she go? Ambrose's voice haunted her. No one would want a woman carrying another man's child. Yet in her darkest hours, one memory kept resurfacing. The man from the balcony, the one who had offered her a handkerchief outside the gala. His words echoed in her mind. "You don't deserve this. I've been watching long enough. It ends tonight." Who was he? Why had his voice felt like a lifeline when everything else was collapsing? Jacqueline shook her head, scolding herself for clinging to the kindness of a stranger. And yet, a flicker of hope sparked in her chest every time she remembered his eyes. Steady, gray, full of something she hadn't felt in years. Respect. Still, the days dragged on in despair. Ambrose flaunted Cassandra openly now, no longer bothering with lies. Gossip columns printed their photos daily, while Jacqueline became a ghost, erased from her own marriage. One evening, as she sat in the nursery surrounded by half-assembled furniture and unopened boxes of baby clothes, she broke down completely. She buried her face in a tiny blanket, sobbing into the fabric as she whispered apologies to her unborn child. "I'm failing you," she cried. "I don't know how to save us." Her phone buzzed again. Another notification. She almost ignored it, but something compelled her to check. This time, it wasn't a headline or a cruel message. It was a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Colton, you don't have to fight this alone. Meet me tomorrow at noon. The cafe across from Central Park. Trust me." Her heart raced. She didn't recognize the number, but she knew in her gut who it belonged to. The man from the balcony had just reached out, and her life was about to change forever. The cafe across from Central Park wasn't flashy. In fact, it was the kind of place Jacqueline used to love before her life was buried in chandeliers and champagne galas. The scent of fresh pastries drifted from the open door, mingling with the crisp bite of late morning air. Parents pushed strollers past the park gates, joggers zipped by in bright colors, and sunlight spilled over the city like a promise of something new. Jacqueline sat by the window, fingers tight around a mug of chamomile tea she hadn't touched. She kept glancing at the door, her heart racing. Her body was still fragile from sleepless nights, but today her spirit was restless. She didn't know why she'd come. A part of her feared it was foolish, that maybe she was walking into a trap, some cruel joke set up by Cassandra or even Ambrose himself. But then the door opened, and he walked in. The man from the balcony, the man from the gala. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence commanded the room without demanding it. He wore a navy suit, crisp but understated, his tie loose as if he'd walked straight out of a boardroom, but didn't care to impress anyone here. Conversations hushed as people noticed him, though most pretended not to stare. Jacqueline's breath caught when his eyes found hers instantly, as though he'd been searching for no one else. He walked over and stopped at her table. "Jacqueline," His voice was deep, smooth, but firm enough to steady her shaking hands. She blinked. You know my name. Of course I do. He pulled out the chair across from her, lowering himself with a quiet grace. I've known who you were long before that night. Her stomach tightened. Why are you helping me? He studied her for a moment, as though weighing how much truth she could handle. Finally, he leaned forward, his gaze unwavering. Because I can't watch a good woman be destroyed by a man who doesn't deserve her. Jacqueline's eyes blurred with tears, but she blinked them away. Who are you? He extended his hand across the table, steady and certain. Ethan Blackwell. The name hit her like a wave. Ethan Blackwell, the reclusive billionaire CEO. His name alone carried weight in every financial circle. He was rumored to control an empire of tech companies, global investments, even philanthropic foundations so vast they rivaled governments. She remembered whispers at galas about his fortune, his power, his mystery. Some said he was ruthless in business. Others said he was a ghost, appearing only when it suited him. But here he was, in front of her, offering not rumors but truth. I don't understand, Jacqueline whispered. Why me? Ethan's gaze softened. Because I saw you long before your husband humiliated you. I saw your strength, and I know what it feels like to be underestimated, to be betrayed by people who should have protected you. Jacqueline's lips trembled. She wanted to believe him, but trust felt foreign now, fragile as glass. What do you want from me? Nothing, Ethan said simply. I'm offering you a choice. You can keep suffering in silence, or you can fight back. And if you choose to fight, you won't be alone. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Fight back? Against Ambrose? Against everything he's built on lies, Ethan corrected. He's not invincible. Men like him think they are, but I've seen bigger empires crumble. All it takes is the right truth in the right hands. Jacqueline stared at him, stunned. Why would you do this for me? For the first time, Ethan's jaw tightened, a shadow flickering in his expression. Because men like Ambrose think women are possessions. They use them, discard them, replace them. I've seen it too many times, and I refuse to watch it happen again. His words struck something deep inside her. For days she had drowned in humiliation, powerless and alone. But now, sitting across from Ethan Blackwell, she felt something spark, a fragile but undeniable flicker of hope. Still, doubt clung to her. I don't have money, I don't have influence, I don't even have the strength right now. What could I possibly do? Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. Jacqueline, you have more than you realize. You have the truth. And the truth, when revealed at the right moment, is more powerful than any fortune. Her fingers tightened on her mug. She thought of the photos, the whispers, the humiliation carved into her memory. For the first time, she wondered if those wounds could be used not to weaken her, but to fight back. Ethan reached into his jacket and slid a card across the table. It was heavy, embossed with his name and nothing else. No title, no company, just a direct number. When you're ready, call me. I'll stand with you, whatever it takes. Jacqueline picked up the card, her heart pounding. For a moment, the weight of the world felt lighter, as though she wasn't carrying it alone anymore. They sat in silence, the noise of the cafe fading around them. Jacqueline finally whispered, "What if Ambrose finds out?" Ethan's eyes darkened, steel in his tone. Then he'll learn he picked the wrong woman to break. Jacqueline swallowed hard. She felt the baby move again, as if echoing Ethan's promise. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by humiliation, but by strength. As Ethan stood to leave, he placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You don't have to decide now, but remember this. When you're ready, you won't be fighting alone. He turned and walked out of the cafe, his tall frame cutting through the morning sunlight. Jacqueline sat frozen, the card clutched in her hand, her heart racing with a strange mixture of fear and hope. And in that moment she realized Ambrose wasn't her only problem anymore. Because now Ethan Blackwell was involved, and nothing would ever be the same again. Jacqueline stared at Ethan Blackwell's card for days. It lay on her nightstand, simple and weighty, a reminder that she had a choice. Every morning she woke to Ambrose's absence and Cassandra's name in the headlines. Every night she cried herself to sleep in the cold cavern of the penthouse. But the card glimmered in the dim light like a lifeline. Finally, one morning, she dialed the number. Ethan answered on the first ring, his voice calm, certain. I was waiting for this call. From that moment, everything began to change. Ethan arranged discreet meetings away from the paparazzi's eyes. He introduced Jacqueline to a small circle of trusted advisors, lawyers, image consultants, even a private investigator. For the first time in months, she wasn't alone in her fight. These people didn't look at her with pity. They looked at her with respect. The private investigator slid a file across the table. Inside were photos, receipts, emails, proof of Ambrose's double life. Not just his affair with Cassandra, but shady business deals, offshore accounts, and financial fraud hidden beneath layers of deception. Jacqueline's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered. "Because knowledge is power," Ethan said. "And soon, Ambrose will regret underestimating you." At first, the thought of revenge frightened her. She had spent so long believing she was weak, believing Ambrose's words that she couldn't survive without him. But as she studied the evidence, something shifted inside her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming her dignity, her child's future, her very identity. Ethan's team helped her prepare. A stylist transformed her wardrobe, not into the flashy gowns Ambrose demanded, but into sleek, powerful outfits that made her feel strong. Tailored suits, elegant dresses in bold colors, shoes that clicked confidently against marble floors. The first time she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. No longer a ghost of a humiliated wife, she was a woman reborn. Her posture changed, her walk changed, even her voice grew steadier. At a private dinner, Ethan leaned across the table, studying her with quiet approval. "You look like a woman ready to take back her life." Jacqueline smiled faintly. "For the first time, I believe I am." But the transformation wasn't only on the outside. Ethan encouraged her to find her inner strength again. He asked about her childhood, her parents, the girl who once dreamed beyond small-town limits. He reminded her that she had built herself before Ambrose, and she could build herself again. "You were never just his wife," Ethan said. "You are Jacqueline Mitchell Colton. And soon, the world will remember your name, not as his shadow, but as your own light." Day by day, she grew stronger. She practiced speeches with a communications coach, learning how to command a room without trembling. She worked with lawyers to understand her rights, her options. She began to plan not only for divorce, but for a future where she could stand tall, providing for her child without Ambrose's poison. And through it all, Ethan was there. Not hovering, not controlling, but steady. A presence she could lean on when fear threatened to return. Sometimes, when she doubted herself, she would catch him watching her with that same gray-eyed intensity from the gala, and she felt her courage renew. One evening, after a long day of preparation, Jacqueline stood on the penthouse balcony overlooking the city. The skyline glittered, but for once it didn't mock her. It felt like an open stage, waiting for her to step into her new role. She whispered to the child in her belly, "We're not victims anymore. We're survivors. We're fighters." The next morning, she made her first public move. Instead of hiding from the tabloids, she walked straight into their cameras. Dressed in a fitted black dress and pearl earrings, she arrived at a charity luncheon Ambrose had arrogantly assumed she'd skip. Heads turned as she entered. Whispers rippled across the room, not of pity this time, but of awe. Jacqueline smiled, graceful yet firm, answering reporters with poise. When asked about Ambrose, she didn't crumble. Instead, she simply said, "I believe every woman deserves respect. I won't accept less, for myself or for my child." The headlines the next day were different. Jacqueline Colton breaks her silence. From humiliation to strength, a wife's powerful stand. Ambrose saw them, of course. And when he stormed into the penthouse that evening, his face twisted with fury. Jacqueline didn't flinch. "What do you think you're doing?" he roared. Jacqueline met his glare with calm eyes. "Taking back my life." He laughed bitterly. "You think anyone cares what you have to say? You're nothing without me. You'll always be nothing." But even as he spat the words, Jacqueline saw something in his expression she had never seen before. Fear. Because Ambrose could sense it, his control was slipping. Later that night, as Jacqueline sat in the nursery, her phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan. "You did well today. He's rattled. The time is coming." Jacqueline exhaled, her hand on her belly. She had walked into the fire and survived. For the first time, she believed she could win. But what she didn't know was that Ambrose, cornered and desperate, was already plotting his next move, and this time, he wasn't planning to play fair. The night of the Empire Trust Gala arrived with a kind of tension Jacqueline had never felt before. This was not another painful evening of humiliation. Tonight, she would no longer be Ambrose Colton's silent, obedient shadow. Tonight, she would stand in the light, strong, unshaken, undeniable. Ethan Blackwell had arranged everything. Quietly, strategically, he had ensured the right reporters, investors, and social leaders would be in attendance. He never told Jacqueline what to say. He didn't need to. She had found her own voice now. But he made sure when she spoke, the world would listen. The gala was held at the Grand Astoria Hotel, its ballroom glowing with chandeliers that dripped light like molten gold. Guests shimmered in gowns and tuxedos, their laughter sharp with anticipation. Ambrose arrived first, Cassandra on his arm, their entrance a spectacle. Cassandra wore a glittering emerald gown with a slit that left little to the imagination. She smiled at the cameras, flashing her diamond bracelet, one Ambrose had bought with money stolen from fraudulent deals. Whispers filled the air. Will Jacqueline show up? Did she finally leave him? Or will she endure another humiliation? The answer came when the ballroom doors swung open. Jacqueline stepped inside. She wore a midnight blue gown that hugged her form, elegant yet commanding. Her hair cascaded in soft waves, her makeup flawless, but it was not beauty that stunned the crowd. It was the power in her stride. She walked not as a woman broken, but as a woman reborn. Cameras flashed wildly. Guests gasped. Even Cassandra's painted smile faltered for a second. Ambrose's face twisted when he saw her. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed as she approached. Jacqueline met his glare with calm defiance. "Standing where I belong." Before he could respond, reporters swarmed. "Mrs. Colton, Jacqueline, do you have a statement about your husband's affair?" The room fell silent. For weeks she had been silent, enduring whispers. Tonight, her voice rang clear. "Yes," Jacqueline said, her gaze steady. "I have something to say. A man who betrays his vows, who humiliates his wife in public, and who mocks the life growing inside her." She rested a hand on her belly. "Is not a man worthy of respect. He's not even worthy of pity." Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Cameras clicked like a storm. Cassandra stiffened beside Ambrose, her claws digging into his arm. Ambrose's face darkened. "Enough," he barked. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're nothing without me, Jacqueline." But Jacqueline smiled faintly, her voice firm. "Funny. That's what you keep saying. And yet here I stand, stronger without you than I ever was with you." Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then growing. Guests who had once whispered now clapped, emboldened by her courage. Cassandra hissed into Ambrose's ear. "Do something." Ambrose, desperate, pulled a document from his pocket. "She wants to act brave, but here's the truth. She's still my wife. And this," he waved the paper, "is a contract she signed. She has nothing. No money, no rights. She can't survive without me." The crowd leaned in, scandal-hungry. But before humiliation could wash over Jacqueline again, another voice cut through the tension. "Actually, she can." Every head turned. Ethan Blackwell stepped forward from the shadows of the ballroom, his presence silencing the crowd. His gray eyes locked on Ambrose, his jaw set like steel. "Because she's not standing alone anymore." Whispers surged. "Ethan Blackwell? Here?" Ethan walked to Jacqueline's side, his hand steady on her shoulder, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Mr. Colton, your lies end tonight." He nodded to his aide, who handed a folder to the nearest reporter. Inside, documents, photos, bank records, the very evidence of Ambrose's fraud, his offshore accounts, his embezzlement. "This," Ethan said calmly, "is what happens when a man builds his empire on lies. The SEC will receive copies by morning. So will the board of directors who once trusted you." Chaos erupted. Cameras exploded with flashes, reporters shouted questions, guests gasped as the scandal unfolded in real time. Ambrose's face drained of color. "You?" He turned to Jacqueline, spitting venom. "You planned this? With him?" Jacqueline's voice was steady as she met his gaze. "No, Ambrose. You planned this the day you betrayed me. All I did was stop hiding from the truth." Cassandra shrieked, pulling her hand from Ambrose's arm. "You said this would never come out. You promised me." Ambrose shoved her away in desperation. "Shut up, Cassandra." The cameras caught it all. The betrayal, the collapse, the villain crumbling. Jacqueline stood tall, every inch the woman Ambrose thought he had destroyed. She placed her hand on her belly and said firmly, "I may be carrying your child, Ambrose, but I will not carry your shame." Applause thundered through the ballroom. Investors turned their backs on Ambrose. Reporters swarmed Ethan and Jacqueline. Cassandra stormed out in tears. Ambrose stood alone, sweating under the lights that once adored him. And then Ethan leaned closer to him, his voice low enough for only Ambrose to hear. "You tried to break her, but all you did was make her unstoppable." Ambrose's eyes burned with hatred, but fear shadowed his face, and as the crowd celebrated Jacqueline's triumph, no one realized that Ambrose, cornered and desperate, was already planning one last ruthless move, a move that could put everything, even Jacqueline's unborn child, in danger. The fallout from the Empire Trust Gala spread like wildfire. By dawn, Ambrose Colton's name was no longer associated with prestige and power. It was plastered across every news channel, every headline, dripping with scandal. Fraud, betrayal, collapse. His empire, built on arrogance and deceit, was crumbling faster than anyone imagined. The Securities and Exchange Commission launched a formal investigation. Investors pulled their money. Business partners fled. Cassandra, once draped on his arm like a crown jewel, vanished from his side, leaving him to face the storm alone. By the end of the week, Ambrose Colton was no longer the king of Wall Street. He was a disgraced man, teetering on the edge of ruin. But Jacqueline's journey was only beginning. In the days following the gala, she moved out of the penthouse. No longer a prisoner of marble walls and cold chandeliers, she found herself in a quiet brownstone Ethan helped her secure, tucked away on a peaceful street overlooking the park. The rooms were smaller, the furniture simpler, but the air was filled with warmth. Her warmth. For the first time in months, she slept without tears. Ethan didn't hover, but he was there, steady as ever. He walked with her to doctor's appointments, sat with her through legal consultations, and made sure the world knew she was no longer a woman to pity, but a woman to respect. Under his guidance, her divorce proceedings gained momentum. Ambrose's lawyers tried to fight, but the evidence of fraud weakened his every move. "You're gonna win this," Ethan told her one evening as they sat on her balcony, watching the sunset bleed across the skyline. Jacqueline looked at him, her hand resting on her belly. "For the first time, I believe you." The final blow to Ambrose came in court. The judge, stern and unyielding, read the evidence aloud. Fraud, embezzlement, infidelity. Ambrose's voice, once commanding, cracked as he tried to defend himself. But the gavel fell heavy, and the verdict was clear. He lost not only his fortune but his reputation, his influence, and most importantly, custody rights. Jacqueline emerged from the courthouse flanked by reporters, her blue dress fluttering in the wind, her chin lifted high. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Justice had spoken. Ambrose watched her from the courthouse steps, his once proud frame hunched and hollow. His eyes met hers, desperate, pleading. But Jacqueline only shook her head softly. "This is the life you chose, Ambrose, not me." Then she turned away, walking into the future he had tried to deny her. In the weeks that followed, Jacqueline's life transformed completely. The baby's nursery was finally complete, painted in soft hues, filled with love rather than emptiness. She spent mornings reading near the window, afternoons preparing for motherhood, and evenings walking through the park, her heart lighter than it had been in years. And Ethan was there through it all. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply showed up, whether it was to bring her warm meals, to listen when her fears crept back, or to stand silently beside her so she knew she was not alone. One night, as they walked by the park where they first met, Jacqueline stopped, her hand on her stomach. "Ethan," she said softly, "why did you help me? Really?" He looked at her, his gray eyes steady. "Because I saw a woman who deserved the world but was trapped in a cage, and I had the power to open the door." Jacqueline's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of gratitude. "You didn't just open the door, you reminded me how to walk through it." Weeks later, in a quiet hospital room filled with soft light, Jacqueline held her newborn child in her arms. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers, a fragile but unbreakable bond. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "We're free now. You'll never know the pain I lived through, only the love I carry for you." Ethan stood in the doorway, watching silently, his expression tender. When Jacqueline looked up, their eyes met, and no words were needed. He wasn't replacing anyone, he wasn't rescuing her. He was standing beside her, offering something she had thought was gone forever: partnership, respect, hope. The months that followed painted a new life for Jacqueline. She launched a foundation for women facing betrayal and humiliation, offering resources, legal aid, and support. Her story, once a scandal, became a source of strength for countless others. Headlines shifted, from betrayed wife to empowered leader. She stood at a podium one evening, addressing a crowd of women who had been silenced by fear, humiliation, or abuse. Her voice was steady, her presence commanding. We are not weak. We are not broken. We are not defined by the men who tried to destroy us. We are defined by the way we rise again. The crowd erupted in applause, tears glistening in the eyes of women who finally felt seen. Ethan watched from the front row, pride in his gaze. And Ambrose? He was a ghost now. Stripped of power, abandoned by Cassandra, shunned by the world he once ruled. His name, once feared, was now a warning whispered in boardrooms: don't become another Ambrose Colton. Jacqueline, meanwhile, had become everything he said she never could. On a quiet evening, as she rocked her child to sleep, she whispered, "We made it. We're safe. We're loved." Her heart swelled with peace, her spirit steady. She had walked through fire and emerged not only unscathed, but stronger. And as she kissed her baby's forehead, Jacqueline knew this truth. No betrayal, no humiliation, no man could ever steal her worth again. Because she was no longer Ambrose Colton's wife. She was Jacqueline, survivor, mother, leader, loved. So that's it, my dear friends. The story has reached its final page, but if you're still here with me right now, it means something deeper has touched your heart. Maybe you saw a piece of yourself in Jacqueline's journey. Those moments of betrayal, of breaking down in silence, of feeling like you weren't enough. Or maybe you felt the fire of her rise, the quiet strength of choosing dignity over despair, of rebuilding from ashes and finding that your worth was never dependent on another person's validation. Life has a way of testing us in brutal ways, doesn't it? But as the Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. That's the essence of healing, knowing that pain and betrayal don't define you, your response does. Just like Jacqueline, you have the power to stand tall even when the world tries to crush you. Think about Marcus Aurelius's wisdom. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Every wound you've carried, every heartbreak you've endured, can become the very force that guides you towards strength. Jacqueline's humiliation became her turning point. Her brokenness became her rebirth. And the same can be true for you. So if you're here right now, let this be your reminder. You are not broken. You are being reshaped into someone stronger, wiser, and freer than you ever imagined. Whatever betrayal you've faced, whether in love, in friendship, or even in your own battle with self-doubt, remember that healing is possible. Rising again is possible. And now, I want to invite you into this movement of strength and hope. If Jacqueline's story spoke to you, if even one sentence made your heart beat faster, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel. Because together, we're not just telling stories, we're building a community where no one has to rise alone. So my friends, carry this truth with you tonight. You are worthy. You are stronger than you know. And your story, just like Jacqueline's, can become a beacon of hope for others.